It's time to talk about thesis creation. And this is the culmination of everything that we have done this semester. This is what everything tends toward from the beginning of the process. When you study the assignment, you figure out what's required of you. As a historian, you say, I want to write a book, I want to write an article, I want to prepare a presentation. And you kind of structure your research and your possibilities, your scope around where you want to end up. So we started the assignment. You know what's required of you, the portfolio. We are working our way to the thesis statement. We started off choosing a topic that we are passionate about, that we have genuine curiosity around, that aligns in real ways with our identity. And then we get into that topic. We do some basics. We study the context. We look at important people, places, events around our topic. We form a genuine research question. This is something we don't know. We may have some suppositions about it. We may have thoughts as to where we will go with it, but our main research question, it's open-ended, it's fruitful, fecund, with possibility, and it is perhaps above everything else interesting to us. It is something that we want to deeply and profoundly know and to learn about. So once we have our research question, we're always researching, we're always discovering. I don't want to present this process as in any way linear. We know that research is messy, it's all over the place. That's the nature of it. So we have some general steps, but of course the steps are the steps can be all over the place. We do know, though, that you have a genuine curiosity and your thesis statement, your assumptions about the topic, your biases, even, are put to the side as much as possible. And you are making a good faith, genuine effort to learn about your topic, to look into your research question. So you consult what we call the literature. So these are things that we've all done. You consult the literature. The literature is what scholars have said about your topic and what they've said around your topic. So we consult the literature because we said that this research process, however individualized and lonely it may feel, you are in fact entering a big conversation about an area of the past. That's what you're doing. So what you want to do is, and we're gonna touch on this throughout this presentation. So what you're doing is you're listening to what has been said, maybe what is being said about your subject, about your area of the past. What are scholars saying about it? That's what you want to know. You're learning this for yourself because you need to know as much about your topic. You are insatiable when it comes to your topic. You are voracious when it comes to your topic. You want to know everything that's said about it. But you're also looking for what's missing in the literature. You're looking for what's missing. This is what we're going to call lacuna or a research gap. And you are ultimately going to contribute to the discussion by stating what you think is missing, what you think is incomplete, what you think is blinkered or limited. So that's what you're going to do. And that's one of the motivations for reading the literature, reading what has been said about your topic. We delved into the primary sources. We said that primary sources are the direct line to know about the past. Every other source that's not a primary source, namely these are secondary sources, it's the literature, is done through a film of interpretation, bias, a secondary person. So primary sources, although biased themselves, although limited themselves, although filled with everything that humans can come up with that is wrong and erroneous, that is the closest thing we have to what happened in the past. So a primary source is, we said that it's something from your time period, the time period that you're studying. It is in some way directly connected to the event. It can be an eyewitness to the event, and that eyewitness, a person, could produce that primary source during that time, after, even today. So some of you are studying, let's say, the rise of hip hop, and someone who, let's say, was in the Bronx in 1972, I actually believe that hip hop has a much broader and more dynamic origin story than just 1972 Bronx. But maybe that's neither here nor there. They could do an interview, let's say today, they could do an interview yesterday. And if they were there in 1972 Bronx, that is a primary source, even though it is over 50 years later. So a primary source is a person. I assume that only people produce primary sources. I would have to think about it. We even make changes to the land. We build things. So I would say pretty much every primary source is going to be produced by a person. Maybe there's an earthquake and there's damage from the earthquake, and that could be like a primary source situation. But I would say every primary source is produced by a person, and the primary source is extant, meaning that it's available to us now. It's available to us now. Every once in a while, you'll find a primary source that's in a secondary source, and we can no longer access. The primary source may have been destroyed or what have you. It may not be available. Every once in a while, you have that. But for the most part, primary sources are available to us somewhat in their original form. That's what extant means. And those are the best picture. It's the best information on what happened in the past. So that is where your thesis is going to originate from. But of course, it's going to be informed by what the literature and what the conversation has come up with, the current state of the conversation. Okay, so with that little preface, let's get into our lecture about thesis creation for my 2 cents, this is the height of historiography. This is the apogee of being a historian. You are not simply consuming information, you are not a passive spectator, you are positing, you are putting forward, you are creating knowledge with this thesis statement. So this is a highly responsible, sophisticated, fraught undertaking, but it's exciting. It's exciting. It's the best the history world has to offer. Maybe it's the best humanity has to offer, right? To create knowledge, to present information to people that will enrich, direct, enhance our present and our future. That is the high calling of a historian. Let's get into it. So a lot of this will be review, but every part of the review, I want you to think about it in light of creating a thesis statement. So we said that the past, everything that happened. So things happen pell mell, helter skelter, and historians come along and make sense, make sense out of nonsense, make meaning of everything that happened for the present. Okay, so a jumble of things just happened, and you may have a different philosophy or worldview about what has happened in human history. You may have a providential worldview. I'm not really speaking to that. I'm just saying that for all that we can tell, just for our purposes here, as historians, the past is just a mess. It is an incomprehensible mess. And so, what you're going to do is you're going to come along and create some sort of order, some sort of meaning, give some sort of interpretation for the past, for the past. And because we are living in the present, and that's all we can do, you are going to be interpreting the past for us today. So you must be doing it for some sort of present concern. So whenever somebody talks about the past, think about this. Whenever someone talks about the past, they're doing it for some present reason. How could they not be? How could they not be? What's the point? What, are you just talking about something in a vacuum with nothing else around it, no context? No. You are always doing something for a reason, for a present reason. And so in this case, you are talking about the past for something that's happening in the present. Okay, so keep that in mind. Also keep in mind that history is not perhaps the conception of how it was in high school. It is a collection of facts that you must memorize and reproduce and in a rote manner. It is unbending, fixed. Things had to happen this way or things happened this way. No, that's not history. It may be the past. So probably things in the past did happen, and there's not really much. So, there's no time machine where you can go back and change it. A number of things, an infinite amount of things did happen in the past, but history, which is making sense of the past for the present is the interpretation of that. It's giving meaning to that, making sense of that. That's never final. The past is final, but the interpretation of the past, the narrating the past, is never final. It's an ongoing, excuse me, it's an ongoing discussion. And some people would put here, it's an ongoing debate. It's an ongoing debate. So people are always going to argue, maybe not always about what happened in the past, but what it means, how it happened, why it happened, what its effects were. So that is always an ongoing debate. You are entering that debate. And if you want to be less confrontational, you are entering that discussion. You are entering that discussion. Just to show you, not that you need this, but the nature of the ongoing discussion, the nature of the ongoing debate, something that happened very recently and right in our midst. So Kamala Harris's presidential campaign, the headquarters of it, at least the the final week of it, was on the campus of Howard University. And you can see that Harris gave her concession speech right in front of where our classes are. So this is Douglas Hall, and my office is right down there. This happened right in our midst. And when I open it up to you all, Howard students, and say, why did Kamala Harris lose the election? There are as many different takes on that, as many different opinions as there are students responding to it. We can probably agree on a number of things. I guess one big question is, did Kamala Harris lose or did Donald Trump win? But we can agree on certain reasons, right? Some would be obvious. Let's say less votes, right? That's an obvious one. But here we're speaking more about, well, there's a lot of different realms and you could speak about it from. Yeah. Um, but we could probably agree on some things that this contributed to Kamala Harris's loss. However, if we're talking about primary reasons or top three, there will be intense debate. And we lived this. We were eyewitnesses, and there would be intense debate. What about 50, 100 years ago when historians are looking at this and debating this? How much more would there be debate over that? So think about that. And speaking of this, when the incoming presidential administration, such as it is, assumed office, one of the first things they did was to assault the past. So remember that we said that we construct the past and do history from the past with primary or extant sources. So if you are tampering with those primary sources, you are inhibiting our ability to do history, to make history. So one of the first things that the Trump administration did was to go back and purge the records, documents, references of the government to what they called DEI, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion. And perhaps the most ridiculous example of this, although that is a high, maybe a low bar, is the purging of the Enola Gay aircraft in World War II, because so this apparently the gentleman who what did he construct the airplane? I think he may have designed and constructed the airplane. I think he did more than pilot it. He named it after his mother. So Gay was a popular last name. We know, Marvin Gaye, the basketball player Rudy Gay. And by the way, Marvin Gaye did add the E to his name because he didn't want to be made fun of. He created this aircraft for his and named it after his mother. But the Trump administration, I don't know if they succeeded in purging it, but because it had the word gay. So this is the ludicrousness of well, frankly, the Trump administration. But this shows the premium that people put on the past and history making, and how a present political agenda will determine how you interpret the past. So think about that. And we're going to discuss in this lecture how doing history, making sense of the past, is always political. It's always political because whatever is done in the present is is political. All right. And by the way, as a historian, I pray that these documents, the Pentagon documents, are backed up, unredacted. So I hope that servers and stuff that these things are not permanently redacted and that these records are not destroyed. Yeah. Okay. So we said think about history as a group of numerous, maybe infinite discussions. So there's a group of people discussing things on the Howard Yard. Okay. Myriad groups of people discussing the past. You are going to choose a group that is nearest to your topic, nearest to the topic that you selected, that you've been studying, and you are going to join the group. And all semester, what you have been doing is you've been listening. You've been listening, right? You have to pay your dues. You have to put in your time. You have to listen to everything that's being said. First of all, to educate yourself, because a lot of people in the discussion, they are professional historians who have been studying this for a living. So they may have put in hundreds, maybe thousands of hours studying what they are talking about. So as a historian, you have to be humble enough to do a lot of listening, right? So that that is a skill, to listen intelligently, to listen actively, to listen perceptively, is a very valuable and necessary skill for you. Okay, so you join a discussion, and now with creating a thesis statement, your task is to make an original substantive contribution to the discussion. So at some point, you've done enough listening, and everyone sort of turns to you to see what you have to say, to see, to hear your contribution to the discussion. And we can talk about later in another lecture how exactly you are heard, how you make yourself heard. Okay, but the point is that your thesis statement is your voice. Your thesis statement is your contribution to the discussions on the yard. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, so how are you going to contribute to this discussion? So remember, as a historian, you join a discussion and you are contributing to a discussion. Okay. And by the way, your the discussion may be among those scholars in that area, in your area of the past, but you can definitely speak to a broader group than just those discussing. You can, in fact, and it's great when historians are able to do this. You can speak to the public. You can speak to the public, and that is, I think, a where YouTube now is excelling in making very entertaining videos on history. Now, granted, in the last, 3 or 4 years, a lot of it has become AI driven. And so now there's kind of like a backlash against that already. Like the AI type of speech. This is not just this. It is this. This is not this. It is this. Like saying a negative first and then saying so you can kind of tell, and then the certain voice, you can tell when it's AI. But I would say the historical consciousness and the appetite for history, bespoke history, relevant history that you can single out and choose and access. Entertainment history, intriguing history is high now, is high. And I think I can definitely say this, um, although as historians we need to not make statements like this, but maybe it's never been so accessible and so varied, the history that you can just access. So I think that it's a great time in that regard. We'll see if all of this makes us more human and more compassionate. Yeah, you know, uh, that would be the point, right? That would be the point. But will we end up, let's say, to give a past reference, will we end up like in World War II, end up killing 60 million to 100 million human beings despite this great knowledge? Yeah. So think about it. Okay. So ways to contribute to the discussion that you join, bring out a new or different aspect, center or highlight neglected people, show a new way to view it, redirect the conversation. This is what you may do in your thesis statement. Show that some assumptions are misguided. This angle that we're talking about, maybe it's a sub conversation, or some of us in this discussion are talking about, maybe everybody has kind of there's a consensus around this angle. It's fine, but it needs to be pushed further. Bring new evidence for established points. Show how the subject speaks to a current exigency, or explain something. Maybe you can explain something more fully. What is the point of all of these? The point is that you are adding something to the discussion. You are contributing to the discussion. You're making an original and substantive contribution. And I will say this is a high bar for undergraduates because you've only been studying this for a couple of months, and you're joining a conversation of people who have studied it for years, maybe most of their lives, is it in some way original? What would be the point of joining a conversation, joining a discussion, and you just said what's already been said? You said what's been said 60 years ago, and everyone looks at you like, have you not been listening? Oh, you must be a recent interlocutor. So you want to make some original contribution to the discussion. Okay, so you do this in the form of your thesis statement, which is the totality of your argument, the main point of your argument, right? So you can get so let's say that you discover a bunch of things from your research. You can get a gestalt, right? A gist from your research. And you are going to present that gist in the form of a main argument. And that is your thesis. So your thesis is your main argument, and it is in some way original and has not been heard in the discussion. Once again, you could say something better than someone. You could highlight something more. So there are levels to originality, right? So maybe something has been said, but you say it clearer. You say it better. Could that be original? I suppose it could. I suppose it could. You could take something that's already been explained and add more evidence to it, more primary sources, right? Theorize it more, put it in a different framework. You could do that. So there are levels of originality. I would say that the highest level of originality is that you have a thought or aspect, a kind of proof, evidence that has not been engaged with, not been commented on in the discussion. So think about that. Think about that. I want you to know your thesis is personal. Your thesis is personal. You are writing it. No one else is writing it. No one else has your mind. No one else has your experiences. No one else has looked at and done the research like you have. This is very personal. The thesis, your main argument, is what you found in your research and what you find important. I don't want to be solipsistic with this, but you're making the statement. So how is it not about you? You say, oh, it's I don't want it to be about me. It's about other people. It's about, yes, I would say that that's good to say. Your thesis statement, we're going to talk about this, is always about people. It's always about what people did, what humans did, right? But more personally, you're making the argument about what people did. No one can explain it like you because you're making it. You researched it. So the vehicle, the medium for articulating something in the past is going through you. So it's a very personal thing. So when I was coming up, hey, always write in the third person. Don't use first person pronouns. Now, definitely use first person pronouns. Why? There's no more deception around this. It's yours. You're writing it. You are not objective. We try to be, but you're so ensconced in your milieu You cannot transcend it. And so maybe it's even better now. A lot of historians do this just to make your biases known right off, right off. Okay, so this is where I'm coming from. This is my connection to the event. These are the let's say ties I have, obligations I have to this subject. This is what I'm bringing to the table, right? So rather than the ledger domain of trying to act like you're totally objective and trying to convey that in language, people know right off where you're coming from. They may know your biases or your commitments. That was the word I was looking for, your commitments. And so they can account for that. But you're not trying to hide yourself or obscure yourself in this project, right? This is your thing. So we encourage you now to use I, me, my, and to freely admit your commitments. Okay, so the thesis should be unique to you. It should be something that you believe in, something that you believe in. It should be declarative. So you are positing something. You're not asking a question anymore. We asked that question initially. That was our research question. Now, what you're doing, you're probably answering that question. However, incompletely, as historians, we like to hedge a little bit because we are not omniscient. And so we like to be kind of tentative. So this is what I found. This is what I believe, maybe so far, right? In the 90s, there was a phrase toward this. So we are going toward something. We're not there yet. So research is never done. History is never done. It's always evolving. It's always changing because the present changes. Because the present changes, because our world changes. Whenever history is done, it's going to be a different sort of history than it was last year, 5 years ago, what have you, because the present is different and we are different, right? So it's always evolving. So you're going to say, this is what I believe now. This is what I'm positing now. It is debatable. Remember that it's not a fact. Something did happen in the past. There's a collection of facts generally that historians hew to. So this happened. We all agree this happened. Uh, you're not saying a fact. You're saying something that's debatable and you believe it to be true, but it's not a fact. You're explaining something. So there is a heavy explanatory aspect to your thesis. And indeed, I would say that you're probably going to explain this in a narrative. Humans think in narratives, humans think in stories. Even something like mathematics is a numerical narrative. Words are, they can be like an alphabetic narrative. Everything is some sort of story because that's how we think. And so in your thesis statement, maybe the book around your thesis statement, the article around your thesis statement, there's going to have to be a beginning, middle, and end. There's going to have to be protagonists, antagonists, um, a denouement, rising action, all of the elements of the narrative. I assume that you would have that in your research, right? But you don't always need to think about that. I think that a story naturally develops. I think that there's somewhere we start our research and we think that's sort of the start to the story. And then there's someone that we end it and we say, hey, other things happened, life went on, obviously, but this is where I'm going to call the end, right? So in some way, the historian is godlike. The traditional notion, let's say, of the God of the Bible, where you are creating something. You're creating something, not ex nihilo, because there's you need stuff to create it, but you are creating it, and you're determining the end and the beginning. You're determining the bounds and the scope of this. So it's sort of godlike or transcendent what you're doing, and you can defend it. So everything you say, everything you posit, you can defend. This is very important. This is very important. Okay, let's go on. Let's go on. Just want to make sure that I am still recording here. Just make sure that I'm still recording because I had a little bit of a hiccup. Make sure that I'm still recording. All right, so let's continue. So thesis statements, theses. That sounds something like an academic disease, but theses are always personal. Always personal. Why? Because you are creating and emitting, dispensing, articulating the thesis statement. It's always political. Why? Because you're always making a statement about people, the polity, and the polity in relationship to the status quo, the way things are or were. And we're going to talk about how oftentimes a thesis statement has to do with people's relationship to power. So there's all sorts of different power relationships. There are power relationships and constructs everywhere. And oftentimes, history is about relationship um, to the power and all of the things around that, the permutations of that. So, your people who you are looking at in your thesis statement will always be operating in a political context of necessity. And what they are doing has a relationship to other people, has a relationship to the powers that be. Yeah, so it's political. It's a dialectic. What does this fancy word mean? It means that it's always in conversation. It's always discussing with someone's, a group of people, right? A broad audience, what have you. There is always a back and forth. I think that a thesis cannot really be done in isolation. What's the point if you make a thesis and then you don't share it? And how could it be isolated? How could you make a thesis statement without knowing what someone else has said? A viable one, I would say. And you see Martin Luther there. He made 95 thesis statements, right? And it was personal and it was political and it was dialectic. He was expecting feedback and pushback and engagement with them. And it's relevant. So Luther's theses were directly about the Roman Catholic Church and how it was influencing the people in Wittenberg right there. right? Right at that time. And he was really fighting, he was protesting against oppression and protesting against corruption. So this was immediately relevant. Okay, so your thesis statement will be all of these. Okay, so things that your thesis statement may do, it may explain what people did. Remember that we're always keeping our eyes on people. Could there be a thesis statement that is not about people? I suppose you could write something on, dinosaurs. I suppose you could have a thesis statement on how the climate changed throughout history. I suppose you could have a thesis statement on what an earthquake did or accomplished. Some of that sounds rather factual, but I would say that the vast majority of people who create thesis statements, it's about people. It's centered on people. So, what did people do? Why did people do something? What effect did these people's actions have? And remember that with this one, with effects or impact, remember that those are largely empty words without adjectival clauses around them. So, what impact? What effect? You just can't say impact or effect. I assume that every little thing we do has an effect. If I blow, it changes the air and the atmosphere, and the ions and atoms, right, shift or whatever, move, get misplaced. So everything has an effect, but that's just the beginning. What effect did it have? Characterize its effect, explain its effect, explain its impact. Okay, explain how something changed. So we're always looking at what is the status quo, maybe I should say what was, and then how did it change? Did it change? That's probably a fact. So the Civil Rights Act of 1964, all the civil rights acts, related acts in the 1960s, it's a fact that they were legalized. They were put into law. But why? Why then not earlier? Why then? Who was responsible for that? A bunch of politicians. No, politicians do not act in a vacuum at all. Was it a bunch of white politicians? Well, why would a bunch of white politicians put something into law that gives some sort of equality to African Americans? So it's just the beginning. The fact of a matter is just the beginning. You need to explain that. How did something happen? And then give your position if there is a debate, and you need to find the debate in the discussion. If there's a debate, what's your position in the debate? And by the way, it's not always adversarial. It's not always acrimonious. You could say there's a debate, but it's a wrong debate. We're talking about the wrong thing. We need to change the terms of the debate. We need to change the direction of the debate. Maybe we need different debaters. Maybe we need different interlocutors in the debate. So there's a bunch of things you can do. All right, I want to cover some important thesis statements to give you some ideas of compelling thesis statements. And these are from master historians. So most of them are from the distant past, but then I have some more recent thesis statements that I think you may find interesting. One thing you should get from this section of the lecture is that the way that you can best create a thesis statement, best draft a thesis statement, is by reading how others did it. So whenever I'm doing research, and I'm nearing the point of drafting a thesis statement, right? It's kind of a mystical process, right? When you say, I've done enough now. Remember that you could research something for your entire life, but at some point, you need to say, I'm ready to join the discussion. So I'm ready to draft a thesis statement. At some point, you need to say that. So, but getting there is not always concrete. There's not one point where everyone can say this is when you should draft a thesis statement. It's sort of something that you know, but I suppose that we could reify it. We could qualify it, I suppose. So here are some thesis statements. So probably the most famous thesis statement in American historiography is from Frederick Jackson Turner, and this is the frontier thesis. I believe this is what 1890s. Frederick Jackson Turner posited this, and he says that the existence of free, unsettled land played a crucial role. So you can see his commitments, right? You immediately see bias. What do you mean unsettled? What does settled mean? Was no one on the land? What are you talking about? But this is for his present, and he's speaking to his group with his commitments, which what what do we want to say? White Protestant American males, probably of a certain age. All right, so that's who he's speaking to. So for all of us who I'm talking to, this land is unsettled. All right, the existence of free and it's free unsettled land played a crucial role in shaping the unique characteristics of American democracy and societal values. So he's calling this the frontier. As settlers, so these are white people, white quote unquote Americans, moved westward. So he's talking about, let's say, from the 1830s about to his present, in the 1890s, maybe 1880s, um, maybe earlier. I'm not a Turner expert. As settlers moved westward, they encountered new challenges that fostered individualism and a pragmatic approach to life. So he's talking about, quote unquote, the settling of the West, right? You may know it in famous kind of, the California Gold Rush and cowboy culture, things like that, which contrasted with the hierarchical structures prevalent in Europe. So you see a lot of the elements of a good thesis. This is change. This is something epic that was happening in American history, and he's theorizing it. There's a comparative element to Europe, right? Which is, it took a lot of time and energy from an effort for Americans to get out up from under Europeans. So you see the comparative element is still there. This process of expansion and adaptation contributed to a distinct American identity, reflecting a spirit of freedom and independence. So the frontier shaped American identity. That's the thesis: identity and values. And he also says, Turner does, that when he wrote this, like I said, it's 18, I believe it's the 1890s, right? He said that the frontier is over. There is no more frontier. So by that time, the West, definitely the Midwest, the Southwest, the West, California had quote unquote been settled. And he said that there's no more frontier. So it's kind of a retrospective. He's saying this is what the frontier did. More than just an appendage or a developing of the United States, it actually determined American character, American identity, American values. Okay, so this is one of the most respected thesis statements in American historiography, although I don't think people really buy it anymore. But sometimes a thesis statement, even when it's incorrect or it's later liquidated, the amount of engagement and discussion that it generated was so productive that it sort of becomes irrelevant, its rightness or wrongness. It was just fruitful for all sorts of fields and directions. So another epic one is our brother Eric Williams, and this would be 1944. So Eric Williams's epic tome, Capitalism and Slavery. He said slavery was integral in financing the Industrial Revolution in England. So this is one of the major modern developments in the civilized white world, the Industrial Revolution in England. And he's saying slavery played a major role, a critical role in fueling, powering the Industrial Revolution in England. Plantation owners, shipbuilders, and merchants connected with the slave trade accumulated vast fortunes that established banks and heavy industry in Europe and expanded the reach of capitalism worldwide. So he's saying what people, in this case, enslaved Africans, what they did vis-a-vis the greatest empire of the time, maybe ever, right? The British Empire. So more than just cogs in that process, this was the engine. The enslavement of Africans was the engine for the greatest empire in the world, right? A lot of scholars would say that industrialization was 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 pivotal for the British Empire, for Britain to be an empire on which the sun never set and all that. Okay. In turn, listen to this part. Mature industrial capitalism helped destroy the slave system. So this is when Williams is exceedingly complex. So slavery built up this system, industrialization and capitalism, our modern world. But at the same time, capitalism needed a free flow. It needed competitive commerce. It needed free workers. And so he posits that slavery became maybe not insolvent, but slavery became not the best economic practice in this industrial capitalist system. And that's why slavery was abolished in the British Empire, 1807, 1808, and of course, beyond, right? That's why it was abolished, not because of the goodness, the humanitarian, the religiousness of white people, of the English. It was because they deemed that it was no longer ultimately profitable for them. So this is a major thesis from Eric Williams, a fine historian who taught at Howard University. I'm trying to think, was he at Howard University in the history department when he authored this book? I think so. In 1944, I think so. And of course, he would go on to be the father of Trinidadian independence and the first prime minister of Trinidad and Tobago. Okay, another epic thesis from our brother Walter Rodney, a Guyanese scholar, so he's Afro-Guyanese, and this was a huge one, and this is a classic um, book, a classic piece of history. And he wrote this in 1972. So think of this. This is the era of independence movements. And think of what we said, that your thesis statement is going to speak to the present. So it's going to speak to the present. So he is speaking to this present. So colonialization in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, Africa, I would say lasted for a lifetime, right? 1884 to 1950s and 60s, right? That's about a lifetime, I guess a current lifetime. And he's writing this in that revolutionary, that independence period. And he says, Europe did not civilize Africa from the 1880s, in the colonial period. It did not civilize Africa. It actually underdeveloped Africa. Instead of developing Africa with civilization, a better way of living, it underdeveloped it. It made it maybe not worse is maybe worse is not the phrase because it was never bad, but it left it in a worse state. Africa and its peoples were flourishing prior to European contact in the 15th century. But trade with Europe and the transatlantic slave trade devolved into an exploitative, one sided relationship favoring Europe, and European nations began a centuries long devastation of African people, societies, and resources. Scramble for Africa, what we were talking about in the 1880s, resulted in European colonialism, and it brought Africa to the brink of ruin. There's an important present aspect. Remember, your thesis statement is not just about the past. There is a very political present purpose to your thesis statement. What does Rodney say? It is incumbent, it is up to Africans now, not Europeans, Africans to revive Africa. So if Africa will succeed, you know, Europeans underdeveloped Africa, but now Africans must develop it again. They must make Africa. So this was a groundbreaking thesis for the time, perhaps, and this is to Rodney's credit, perhaps this is axiomatic for us now. This could show the power of the thesis, that the thesis is so compelling and so right that it then becomes the zeitgeist through a long and involved process. It becomes conventional thinking, right? But perhaps even that could be debated because I still think that there's let's just speak just a small aspect of this about humanitarianism. A lot of people still think that it's white humanitarianism that will save Africa. So maybe it's not as axiomatic as I present it. All right, our good sister Nicole Hannah Jones, a professor of journalism at Howard University. This was extremely controversial when it came out, 7 years ago? But this was another epic one, and this is kind of interesting because I don't think Hannah Jones. Well, I know Hannah Jones was not coming up with something strictly original here. So many scholars and Black scholars had posited 1619. Did they posit it as the founding of the United States? Like, did someone like Lerone Bennett, let's say, did someone like John Hope Franklin, Benjamin Quarles, quarrels. Did they say that 1619 was the founding? Did they say it in an explicit way? Did they write a whole book on it and have a whole project and a whole series around it? No. So Nicole Hannah Jones, as what, an assistant editor at the New York Times, one of the most powerful, newspaper empires and newspapers uh, in the world, had a platform to present this and develop this thesis. So the year 1619, remember, that is when in the British colony of Jamestown, 20 or so Africans, if memory serves me correctly, on a Portuguese ship. What was it? The White Lion. And they were from Angola. They were purchased, these African human beings were purchased by some British quote unquote settlers in Jamestown, which is like modern day, Hampton, Virginia. They were purchased and enslaved. And that is seen as the start of American chattel slavery, which was, largely, at least initially, British based. So there's a direct flow of the Jamestown purchase and enslavement of African human beings to just the broader American slavery, American enslavement of Black people. So Hannah Jones says that the year 1619 marked the founding of the United States, and it's not 1776. So it's not with the Declaration of Independence. It's not with the Continental Congress. It's not with the victory of the colonials in 1783. It is 1619. That's the founding. So what is this doing? It is centering Africans, centering Black people in the history of the United States, and decentering white colonials, right? British white people, British descended white people. So slavery and the contributions of Black Americans are so fundamental to the formation of the United States that they deserve to be placed at the center of American history rather than at its margins. Epic thesis. Epic thesis. Okay. Some theses, and so these are some different theses I'm going to present to you now. They're not necessarily groundbreaking, but they're important uh, in what they do. So Kelly Carter Jackson is showing here. Think about this. Remember that your thesis is going to do some major explaining, some major demonstrating. Kelly Carter Jackson is writing in the BLM era. And remember that when we say BLM, we're talking about the philosophy, not the organization per se. So Carter Jackson is writing in the BLM era. And Carter Jackson is showing that, contrary to popular belief, African Americans were not all nonviolent. The popular narrative from the civil rights movement is that all Black people were nonviolent. And this is how they brought about change. And this is the correct way. The, the only valid way for Black people to bring about change. Carter Jackson is defying that. And she's doing that through history. And she's showing how Black people, Black abolitionists, use violence often to bring about justice. Okay, so this is the first historical analysis exclusively focused on the tactical use of violence among antebellum Black activists. Okay, so she's showing that through tactical violence, tactical, so this is strategic, It is pointed, it's measured. Black abolitionist leaders accomplished what white nonviolent abolitionists could not. And she is saying that they they brought about the Civil War. Huge thesis. Huge thesis. We'll see if it becomes one of the groundbreaking. It has to percolate. It has to resonate first, right? We need some time to we'll see what historians say about it in 10, 15 years. Okay, so tactical violence by Black abolitionists brought about the Civil War. Think about that. What a revelation, right? Another revelation. This is by Etta Fields Black, and this won the Pulitzer Prize. This won the Pulitzer Prize. So Fields Black shows. Remember, so this is a revelation. We've never had a narrative with this many primary sources and this many details and this much explanatory power as Combi. Okay, so this is on how Harriet Tubman in June of 1863 um, piloted 2 regiments of Black U.S. Army soldiers, the Second South Carolina Volunteers and their white commanders up coastal South Carolina's Combahee River and 3 gunboats. In a matter of hours, they torched 8 rice plantations and liberated 730 enslaved Black people. Okay, this is during the Civil War, 1863. Harriet Tubman, a Black woman, leads a raid and frees 730 enslaved Black people. And this kind of like way is way more than she liberated through her Underground Railroad efforts. I think the figures there are like 70 to 100 enslaved Black people in the Upper South that she valiantly, by the way, courageously helped liberate. She brought to freedom through the Underground Railroad. This is 730 people. And so what Fields Black is doing is that she is narrating this as never before with the details, the scope, the primary sources. That's what she's doing here. And this is a major contribution. Like we said, this is a Pulitzer Prize level contribution. All right. Marcia Chatelain, listen to this. Think about this. So Chatelain, I can't get into Chatelain's mind on this, but listen to the way that I'm framing this. You are taking something that is ubiquitous. McDonald's are everywhere in America. I think it may be the most plentiful fast food restaurant, the most ubiquitous fast food restaurant. Although I think these days Subway with their gas station, outposts may have surpassed McDonald's, right? But McDonald's is just ubiquitous, and so Chatelain is looking at something that is perhaps the most familiar thing to us in U.S. society, and saying, okay, what what was McDonald's? What did it do vis-a-vis Black people? So think about that for your thesis. You are taking something familiar, something we all know about, something that's mundane, banal, every day, and you're looking at it historically, theoretically, and trying to figure out its impact, its effect. So Chatelaine says, hey, fast foods are contributing to the obesity and diabetes and bad health of African Americans. Yes, they are capitalism in the worst way because it is selling you things that are not. It is compellingly advertising to you, getting you to buy. Maybe getting is not the right word, but compelling you, alluring you to buy things that are not good for your health. But McDonald's have been a source of economic opportunity and political power for African Americans. So this is McDonald's like you've never thought of it before. So think of that for your thesis statement. What is this? It could be every day, it could be common, it could be normal. What has it meant to Black people and the advancement of Black people or the retrogression of Black people? Chatelaine is acknowledging that it's in many ways it's been harmful to African Americans. But then Chatelaine says, I want to complicate this a bit. There's also been some positives. Okay. This also won the Pulitzer Prize. So Pulitzer Prize. I'm trying to remember if okay, yeah, the Pulitzer Prize. Yeah. So Nicole Hannah Jones won the Pulitzer Prize as well for the 1619 projects. So these are all Pulitzer Prize winners. So these are epic thesis statements in their way. Okay, another functional. So this is on Black owned bookstores and it's by Shar Adams. And there's also a rich present milieu to this as well, because bookstores are fading. Brick and mortar bookstores, everything that's not Amazon is fading. And I think Shar Adams may have a political project here of saying this was an important aspect of African American society that we should not forget about. So Adams is showing the important function of Black owned bookstores. And this is the first book of its kind. This is the first book of its kind. So it's an important work. And why I have function here is you may want to show in your thesis statement the role or function of something. Think about that. The role or function of something. Okay. And new perspectives here. So this is Jay Finley. And, I've seen some books that have theorized. So one, I think negative, but Jay Finley would disagree. But it's construed as negative that Black women are sassy. It used to be before sassy, I think the word was saucy. Black women are sassy. They talk back. They have, quote unquote, attitudes. Jay Finley doesn't see this as negative. By the way, I think that Jay Finley would not deny that the stereotype has been weaponized against Black women. But Finley here wants to say that this sass through the lens of Black women comedians had a political purpose. So Black women comedians are more visible than ever, performing around the world in physical venues like comedy clubs and festivals, along with appearing in films, streaming specials, and online videos. Across these mediums, humor, and particularly sass, functions as a tool for Black women to articulate and redress cultural, social, and political marginalization. That last part is the thesis, and Finley is going to prove, provide evidence, make a case for that thesis in this book. So you can take something that is a stereotype and say, okay, we'll take your sass. Fine, Black women are sassy. Why are they sassy? What does their sassiness do? What has their sassiness accomplished? That's the point. So you're thinking differently. You're always going deeper. You're looking at why. You're explaining it. Don't stop with Black women are sassy. Now, you can write another book that disproves that if you want and say, hey, Black women aren't sassy. Sassy is a construct of white people that's used to disparage Black women. And I'm going to show you how it's contrived and how it's done harm to Black women. That could be another sort of thing. But here, Finley is owning this as. So think about that, a new perspective to something. All right, so there's all sorts of, I'm just going to go through some. I know that I've been lecturing long. Bear with me. Watch this on 1.5 or watch it in several installments. Okay, so more thesis statements, a new way to look at an old thing. So Isabel Wilkerson, a Black historian, winner of the Pulitzer Prize, says caste, the Indian, the nation of India, the caste system in India is a good way, a good frame to view and consider race relations in America, and particularly racial discrimination against African Americans. So caste is a new way of looking at an old problem, at an old issue. So think about that for your thesis statement. What could be a new or better or more revealing way to look at something that we all know about? The 1619 Project, we've already covered that, but it's saying 1776 was not the founding of America. It was 1619. So your thesis is upending a an agreed upon, apparently uncontroversial notion. What about Whitman's Hitler's American model? Here, Whitman is saying, hey, you've heard about the Nazis. Someone once said that Hitler really made racism evil, whatever. And how could you say that? I mean, racism had been very, very evil before Hitler. But there's something about Hitler now, and maybe Hitler is becoming overused because I think that the power of summoning Hitler is now diminished because Hitler is summoned so often. But it used to be when you called somebody a Nazi or you invoked Hitler, that was the end of the conversation and that was the worst thing that you could say about someone. Yeah. But I think that, what is it, the Goodwin's Law? I think it's Goodwin's. But it says that in internet conversations, if there's an argument and if it goes long enough, something like that, Hitler's name, Nazis will be invoked. Yeah. So here Whitman is saying that Hitler and the Nazis got their model for the Jewish Holocaust, the Holocaust of Jewish people, the extermination of 6 to 7 million Jewish people from American racism, from the American system, from Jim Crow, from Jim Crow. So once again, this is a new way of looking at an old thing. So I think that I would, if I could ask, Whitman, I would say how much of selling a book, how much of advertising a book went into this? Because I think that Whitman, I think rightfully does a lot of hedging in the book, but the way that it's advertised, you have to kind of come out and say, Hitler, it's Hitler's American model. So Hitler got this, uh, wrought this enormous evil, on humanity and Jewish people because of what Hitler learned from America. That's overstated. And I think that Whitman would say that. But, you have to sell books. So you need a pat and succinct summary to get people, you know, maybe it lacks some nuance, but to get people to buy the book, right? Okay. So explaining change, explaining change. So look at this. How can your thesis statement, how can your thesis statement explain epic change? So the world is the way it is now. Our nation is the way it is now, not because of inexorable forces or currents. People brought about change in every instance. How did change occur? How did apparently inviolable constructs, ideas, practices, mores, how did they shift, transform, revolutionize? How did they change? So remember the Chinese Exclusion Acts, the demonization, dehumanization of Chinese people and particularly immigrants to the United States in the 1880s, 1890s, and beyond. Now, Asians, Chinese are the model minority. How did that change? How did they go from being dehumanized and degraded in America and excluded from immigration now to where they are the model minority? So all minorities can look at Chinese Americans and model how to be an American, how to be a minority American from Chinese Americans. How did that change? So your thesis statement is to explain that. How did the Irish become white? So remember that there were a lot of ethnic, I'm not going to say ethnic white people, but let's just use that term, ethnic white people. The Irish, the Italians, the Jews in early America, they were not considered white. Okay, so in many ways, the way that there is a deep history, from my 2 cents, the worst racism is toward Black people. So think about that. That's my thesis for you. In America, with white Americans, they are most racist and the most intractable discrimination, prejudice, the most deep-seated racial animus of white people is toward Black people. Okay? So Irish immigrants to America were slandered in Black ways. They were called the N word. They were called subhuman. In the same way, so white people were employing the same images, depredations that they use for Black people in the Irish, and they were calling the Irish Black. Same with Jews and same with Italians, right? Very, very, I think, telling studies. Jewish people were referred to as, the N word, they were referred to in anti Black ways. So white people were drawing from the reservoir of their racism toward Black people to be racist toward Jewish people and Irish and the Italians. Okay? They became white. They became white in the censuses of the United States. They were seen as white people by, let's say, British Protestants, Scandinavians. in America. How did that happen? So this is how the Irish became white. And what about cigarettes? So the rise, fall, and deadly persistence of the product that defined America. Pulitzer Prize finalist. So cigarette smoking used to be ubiquitous. Watch this on the show like Mad Men or something like that, or watch an old movie. Watch a movie from the 1940s and 50s. Everybody was smoking everywhere, right? I'm being hyperbolic, of course. And then it was almost outlawed everywhere. Cigarette smoking was almost outlawed everywhere. Why? What happened? So your thesis statement is accounting for that shift, for that sea change. Okay, long explanations. Look at this Fantasyland. So this Kurt Anderson is trying to account for why the United States would elect a president of the caliber of Donald Trump. And Anderson's saying, I'm going to need 500 years to explain this to you. How America went haywire, a 500-year history. Our brother Ibram X. Kendi, who teaches in the Howard History Department, Chain of Ideas, the origins of our authoritarian age. So this is another book in the age of Trump. Trump is authoritarian. Where did this start from? Did it just pop up from nowhere with Trump? Where did it come from? And then Jared Diamond answering a question that I think should be close to the hearts of African Americans, Africans in diaspora, and really all, quote unquote, subaltern people, black and brown people. How did white people get on top? How are they controlling the world, let's say for the last, what, 200, 300 years? You're going to have some issues with the Ottoman Empire, right? But what, 300 years, 200 years? Jared Diamond says, I'm going to need 13,000 years to explain this, how this happened. Okay. Thesis statements for the urgent present. Remember that we said that every thesis statement is about the present, but sometimes it's directly urgent. So, would you write a book on the history of Greenland if Trump was not trying to? Remember what, just a couple months ago, Trump was dead set and putting out kind of like feelers on how he was going to annex Greenland. So it's a history, right? Less than a year old, lessons from the Vikings to Trump on people trying to, nations, groups trying to own Greenland. A short history of the Gaza Strip, right? Was October 7th, 2023, 2024, the start of the Israel, should we say Hamas or Israel Gaza war, right? A short history of the Gaza Strip. On the side of ice. So this is kind of like a history of ice. All of these are like within the last year or two. These books are speaking to very present and very political situations. Okay, Sanctuary in America, how activists defied the government and defended immigrants. So this is a history of that, really to empower the same sort of thing in the present, to empower the same sort of thing in the present. What about the mundane and ordinary? This is kind of what Marcia Chatelain did with McDonald's. Meet Me by the Fountain, an inside history of the mall. Do you remember pre-COVID, maybe even before then, how much shopping malls were in the warp and woof of our lives? I think they've definitely had a decline in fall with probably the rise of Amazon, the rise of Uber and Lyft, where they can bring stuff to your house, right? So all of that, but you're taking the ordinary and you're giving a history of it. How is that not important? Something that has impacted and so influenced all of our lives. The last subway. Why do subways take so long in New York City? Why? Hey, I'm going to need a book length to explain this to you. We got to break it down. The norm would be that subways would be on time. They're proverbially and epically not in Bronx, Brooklyn, Manhattan, Queens, Staten Island. Why? What about starting over in America? So moving somewhere new. So these are all histories of the quotidian, right? Zero. We all know what zero is. It's nothing. But how is that a number? How is zero a number? So you take something mundane, you take something ordinary, and you say, okay, I got serious questions about this. Right? We always talk about zero. How is it a number when it's nothing? How can nothing be a number? And so this guy Charles Seif, he concludes that it was a dangerous idea. Zero was a dangerous idea. What about the banana? It's the fruit that changed the world. So in what way? So this is a normal, we buy it in the supermarket. You can get a banana anywhere. Everyone eats bananas, right? But did you know that this fruit changed the world? Temptation transformed. We always talk about Eve ate the apple in the Garden of Eden, and then Eve gave the apple to Adam. But the Bible doesn't say that it was an apple, it just says that it was a fruit. How did this become an apple? The Bible never says apple. So, how did it become an apple? Right? So, you're studying that process. You're taking the ordinary and you are explaining it, right? There's now a whole series on the histories of color, a color, the histories of a color. So think about this. You can have a thesis around, you can theorize anything. Okay. It is what you find important and you want to think deeply and long about it. And you want to consult the original sources. And you want to say, hey, we all do this, we all know this. But this is why it's so meaningful in our lives. This is what it has meant to us. I would say that the more ordinary or quotidian something is, probably the more worthy of a thesis statement it is. Why is it so entrenched in our lives? So, for any given event, there will never be any end to thesis statements because for any given event, there are thousands of facts and thousands of ways to look at that event. There are thousands more ways to interpret that event. Think about that. Thesis statements will never end, especially because we said not only are there a thousand ways to interpret it, a thousand ways to look at it, but the present is ever changing. We are ever changing. And we will always need new theses, new ways to look at something. So this is Andy Warhol's famous painting of Marilyn Monroe, and this is seen as a postmodern masterpiece of art. And what is it saying? It's saying there is no one right way to look at Marilyn Monroe. Every one of these ways to look at Marilyn Monroe is equally valid. I don't know if I adhere to these postmodern commitments, right? Because postmodernism will try to rationalize away the Holocaust, or rationalize away slavery. Hey, slavery really didn't happen, or there's another way to look at slavery. It was really great, and all this stuff. So I'm not totally with that, but the point's taken here that Marilyn Monroe, let's call Marilyn Monroe the past. Marilyn Monroe she just was. So the past happened. There's a bunch of things that happened in the past, and those are facts. But interpretations are probably endless. And the way to interpret the fact of Marilyn Monroe, the way to look at Marilyn Monroe is endless. And there's probably some validity to all sorts of different ways of looking at Marilyn Monroe. Okay, so let's take the American Revolution and be thinking of this for your thesis statement, right? Where this lecture is going somewhere, and hopefully we've opened up some fruitful avenues of your mind, right? So think of this. You have your topic, you've been researching your topic. Look at all the different perspectives of it. So it's a fact that the American Revolution happened from what? 1776 to 1783, what have you, right? Maybe someone these days is positing a long American Revolution. So 1776 to 1812. Maybe somebody says 1776 to 1865, right? That's when America was founded. Maybe someone says 1776 to 1965. Look at all these different perspectives. So the American Revolution, according to women, from a woman's perspective, then you have white women, you have black women, you have indigenous women, you have European women. It's endless. How they experience that war is important. It's valid as much as any other thing is valid. The American Revolution, according to Indians, they were not peripheral, especially in the lead up to it. Let's say the French Indian War, so called, right? They're in no way peripheral. Could we center indigenous people, Native Americans, Amerindians, could we center them in the American Revolution? What would that yield? Black people. And this is a really interesting thing because there's really no obvious right or wrong here, if you will. So if you're a enslaved black person in the colonies, whose side are you going to fight on? There was slavery when it was a British, when they were British colonies. There will be slavery when they are a quote unquote American colony. So who are you fighting for? Maybe both sides are offering you freedom or offering you individual freedom. Both sides could be lying about that. So who do you fight for? Both sides have rhetoric of freedom and liberty. So all of these are valid ways of looking at the American Revolution, and there is sub-literature on all of these. Okay, so let's talk about steps to a viable thesis. And maybe when we were talking about all of that, your mind has been percolating and you may know where you want to go with it. So we said, first of all, learn the scholarly literature on your topic. Remember that your thesis must be something that has not been argued. How should I read the literature? Deeply learn about your subject. Now, by the way, I love the cover to that book. I've always liked that painting. So this is on American Egyptomania, and it's just so profound just how African Americans have related to Egypt. If we want to speak broadly, in slavery, Black people most identified with the Hebrews, who were enslaved by Egyptians, and they got, they got their freedom from the Egyptians in the Exodus. After slavery, we know that the Exodus motif persisted in Black America to this day. You remember that Obama was using Exodus rhetoric. BLM was using Exodus rhetoric, right, to this day. But Black people were doing something interesting. They were identifying with Egyptians for the purpose of racial self-esteem. So it was said that Black people had no history. So Black people were identifying with this grand, you know, grand past of Egyptians. Yeah, so powerful stuff, American Egyptomania. So how should I read the literature? The scholarship on your subject. Use it to deeply learn about it. Find out the things that scholars have to say about your subject. Discover the issues and debates in the literature. Focus in on a person, a group, or people or groups in a certain place and identify what is missing. Is what is missing totally going to determine your thesis statement? No. In fact, that would kind of be like forcing a thesis statement, right? I'm only interested in what's missing. No, you're going to naturally research. You're going to naturally research what is important to you. And then once you discover that, you can then go and compare it with what's being said about it in the literature and decide what you need to do. If you don't have anything new to bring to the table, that is fine, right? That is fine. I wouldn't force or make something up. And this is an important thing. I wouldn't force or make something up to try to um, get a compelling thesis. And just because it's not the literature. So you're going out of your way to do that, right? But we'll talk about what you do if you've done all this research and you say, I don't really have anything original to say. We're going to talk about that. Okay, so you're looking for a lacuna, or you're observing a lacuna, a gap in the research. Does the literature discuss the part of the area that you are interested in? Do they cover it to your satisfaction? Is it missing something? A great photo here of Carnegie Woodson's, the first organization of Negro history. A great photo, right? Today's Asala. All right. Did I go through all these? Yeah. Could they write about it better? Could they focus on something different? Are Black people accounted for? Black women accounted for? You can go on and on this, right? You want to rely on your primary sources. Remember that this is about really basing your thesis statement, basing your research on evidence. Not having a thesis statement initially and then trying to find things that support it, because you will succeed. You can find anything, you can find support for anything. You will succeed in that, but you'll want to be genuine. You'll want to be earnest. The importance of being earnest in historiography cannot be underemphasized, right? So you're honestly trying to find knowledge. You are genuinely curious about this, and you will go where these sources lead you. Why? Because there's nowhere else to really go. If you're not basing something on primary sources, what are you basing it on? Okay. Now, we've already discussed primary sources, so you already know what they are. They're firsthand accounts of of a topic, of an event, of people who had connection with it. And we're kind of going with the peoples here, right? Like I said before, I assume that there could be like a certain place in the wild or something like that that you could use as a primary source. But I would almost guarantee you humans had something to do with manipulating or whatever. So I would say that it always comes from a person. It always comes from a human. It is always extant. It's available, right? So I would encourage you to, we've already done this, but take your topic and find different source sets and draw from different sources. Draw from a number of different source sets. Yeah. You'll need a multitude of primary sources to get at any sort of truth. Okay, so we said you should rely on your primary sources because it's the basis of all historiography. It's the only way we know about the past. And by the way, I do want to tip my hat and shout out to, let's say, African Ways of Knowing, which is like a griot, which says that there is an oral transmission. So extant could be what's passed down verbally from one generation to the next. That could be a form of extant. I would say these days by now it's probably written somewhere, right? But there is oral transmission, and that is, I believe, a valid form of a primary source, as valid as anything else. Because people say, well, people could forget things, or it's like the old telephone game, it gets distorted. That happens in print. That happens in print as well. That happens in every other media as well. So that is not exclusive to oral transmission. It give direct access to past, closest thing to event, since they are from the time, everything about them, the material, language, presentation, medium tells you about the time. All right. They have primary sources have a bias of the creator, but there's not an additional bias from a secondary source. So there will always be bias, but you are getting the least amount of bias from the primary source, right? No one can interpret primary sources like you can, and you can't trust anyone else's interpretation, right? So this is a deeply personal thing. And primary sources often possess details that secondary sources omit. So very, very important. How can you get an edge here? You're saying, hey, Dr. Baker, every historian is looking at the same primary sources. So how am I different? What can I bring to this? You want to try to identify and consume all primary sources on your topic. I know that this is a tall tale, but the more primary sources you get, the more fuller a view you would have of the past. Think about it. If there's a car accident and you talk to one or two people, okay, but what if you get 20, 30, 40 people who saw it? You can probably come to the truth of that. Now, if it's an area like the Civil War, or let's even say like the BLM protests of 2020, there's going to be millions of sources. So it's not possible for you to even do that, right? But you'll want to try to get. I mean, I say this with no hesitation. You'll want to try to get as many primary sources as you can. Try to get all possible knowledge and meaning from the sources. Okay, so this is very, very important, right? Try to get all possible knowledge and meaning from the sources. You want to ask new and different questions of your sources. What do I mean by new and different questions? One of the things could be, what are my people doing? The people that I'm focusing on, where are they in the sources? If they're missing, why are they missing? If they're there, What's being said about them? What can I extrapolate from this? What does this source do in comparison to this source? And we've already gone to how to analyze the sources, right? What is this? What are the biases of this source? What is this source in relationship to the event or my people? What is this source's relationship to power? You want to heavily critique your sources, both critique them and sympathize with them. So by sympathize, I mean you want to look at the sources from the source's perspective and really enter into that experience with the source. But at the same time, you'll want to find the limitations of the source. Your thesis statement should arise from primary sources. We keep stressing this, not be imposed on them. So you are getting your thesis statement from the primary sources, not having a thesis statement and then saying, okay, primary sources conform to this thesis statement. The the flow of this relationship is important. Your thesis comes from the primary sources. You are not forcing the primary sources to agree with your thesis statement. Okay, so very, very important. Okay, so going into our assignments, all to move toward a thesis statement. You want to share 4 theses from historians about your topic. If there aren't, if you can't find any thesis statements on your topic, particularly on your question, then you can get things adjacent to it, next to it, like it, in a similar historical situation or next to it. So, what are these theses that historians have said about it? And what do you think that you want to say that may be like them, maybe on the same vein, but is different? What are the sorts of things they're commenting on? What are the sorts of things that they're commenting on? Do you want to comment on similar things? You want to comment on something different? Do you want to change the conversation? Do you want to bring in a new aspect, a new element? Do you want to bring in a new framework? Do you want to give a different explanation? I would get as close to your topic as you can with these 4 thesis statements. And really, this is just for the purpose of our assignment. If it was me, if you're really doing a thorough and deep dive, you want to get all the thesis statements pertaining to your topic, all the arguments, I'm saying, even the sub arguments, because sometimes what someone says about your topic is not even their main argument, but it's a sub argument within a larger argument. You'll want to know that. You need to know that. Okay. Share 5 things that you've discovered about your topic. And you want to go beyond just the simple and the basic. What are 5 things that are experts in the field may know about them, but the average person wouldn't know about them? So these are 5 formidable and noteworthy observations that you have made, things that you found out about your topic, your subject. Now, what are 4 things that you believe about this area of the past that you've been studying? 4 things that you believed. And from your research, from what you know about what scholars have said about it, they may be controversial. They may be controversial to people in the know, to scholars in your field. Okay, so this is going beyond facts and it's sort of interpretive. It is sort of explanatory. It is maybe a bit theoretical. So you're taking those facts, you're taking a collection of facts, and you're theorizing on it. Okay, and we are going to do entire class periods doing examples, giving examples of this with your own work. So don't worry about that. This is not theoretical really at all. We're going to uh, do these with your topics aplenty. So you're going to review Princeton. You're going to review Schrag's 5 elements of a thesis. Okay, so the 5 elements of the thesis. Let's go through these. This is what Schrag says your thesis should revolve around. This is how you can come up with a compelling, come up with a viable thesis statement. Why? Why did something happen? He says why or occasionally how. I would say that a lot of historians would lead toward how, because why, sometimes why can be nebulous or speculative, whereas how shows how something happened. But then why did it happen? That can be more speculative, but you can also say why, right? So who, what, where, and when are important, but that may be in the realm of fact. Whereas why and how make an argument. That's an interpretation, right? So this is where you earn your money, so to speak, right? Who, what, where, when, why, all of those questions, those are probably facts. They're probably agreed upon. Not always, right? Like we said, it's a big debate as to if actual aerial bombs, that is, bombs from an aircraft, were actually leveled, dropped on the Greenwood district in Tulsa, the black neighborhood, the black district of Tulsa. If a plane actually flew over the neighborhood and dropped those bombs, that could be debated, right? I haven't. I'm not sure the evidence or lack thereof for that, right? I'm sketchy on that. I think maybe general historiography is sketchy as well. But most of the time, we know the who, what, where, and when. Now you need to say, why did this happen? Or how did it happen? Okay, so that could be where your thesis is. You're looking at a big event, you're looking at a change, you're looking at development. Why or how did it happen? And your thesis is the answer to that, right? So Mandela was released in what, 1991, and this was basically the death knell of the legal apartheid system. He was elected, I think, in 1994, and we know these facts, but what's the deeper story? How was he released? How was he elected? Why did that happen then? How long was he in? How long was he in prison for? 24 years, 25 years. So why then? And were there larger things at play? The answer is, of course there were. Of course there were. There was worldwide outrage. But why was he released when he was? So these are some valid questions. Remember, people. So your thesis statement will revolve on around what people did, what people accomplished, how people reacted, maybe what people didn't do. I was reading a history book on, I think it was on silence, and it was about how there's silence or there's like a lack of change when there should have been change. There shouldn't have been silence. This should have happened, but it didn't happen. Okay, so let's say that Derek Chauvin, the white supremacist Minneapolis police officer, kneels on the neck, murders George Floyd. 8 minutes and 46 seconds. His knee is on his neck. His knee bone is on his neck. And let's say that this person, maybe the mayor of Minneapolis, maybe the governor of Minnesota, did not comment on that. They were silent. That needs to be accounted for. You see what I'm saying? So there can even be theses around things that didn't happen, that should have happened, right? So why didn't they happen? Why didn't they happen? Why didn't this person comment on that when everyone else, it seemed like, was commenting on this and condemning this? This to me was a an objective wrong, right, by Derek Chauvin. This is objective harm. Almost everybody, at least at the time, could condemn this. This was inhuman, inhumane. It was cruel and unusual. Why didn't this person comment on it? Okay, but in the more positive, what did these people do proactively, reactively, over time? How did they change things? Okay, something surprising, right? This shows something that happened that was extraordinary or remarkable, right? We were expecting for this to happen, and this came out of nowhere, seemingly. But you're going to explain it, right? You're going to explore and explain the unknown, the mysterious, why something didn't happen, why something did happen, and behind all of this, underneath all of this is people, what people are doing. Okay, a better, more complete explanation. So this could be on the spectrum of not that original, right? Not as original maybe as it could be, right? So you are taking something that happened. We all know it happened. We've accounted for it, but you're giving a fuller explanation. You are bringing more original sources to bear on it. So you are enhancing, you're buttressing the narrative. This is important. This is important. Okay, an alternative explanation. So something happened, and in the discussion that you're listening to, they're generally explaining what happened in this way. This is why people did this. This is what people did. This is how they did it. This is the effect that it had. Hey, I have a different explanation for that. There were different factors at play, right? So the summer of BLM, it obviously, the BLM protests were obviously catalyzed by the virality of the video, the recording of Derek Chauvin kneeling on the neck of George Floyd for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. But there could be theses around that that say that a lot of the turn up was because of the worldwide quarantine, the national quarantine that kept us in our houses. And our rage over seeing what Derek Chauvin did over the murder sort of combined with our antsiness, our frustration, our stir craziness from being in the house for so long. And we had to get out. At the same time, I've heard young people say that my parents would not let me go out and protest because of the quarantine. All right? Some people say, well, there is a environmental explanation for the BLM protests. They happened right around summer. So you had Ahmaud Arbery, maybe in January, February. Then you had Breonna Taylor. Was that like March, April? And then you had George Floyd. And this came right during the summer. These protests would not have happened if it was winter, if it was raining, if it was April, right? So this is interesting. You could take the BLM protests and apply it to where you were. So if you were in high school at the time, this is how my high school reacted to, contributed to, protested what happened, right? So that's a new angle. We don't know about that. And the discussion would take that angle of what your high school did, Paul Laurence Dunbar High School in Washington, D.C. It would take that and then take what you give it, what your thesis statement is on their reaction to it, and they would put that in the broader narrative, and we could get a better picture of the whole. Okay, I want you to attend to, I want you to be very humane in your thesis statement. We said that your thesis statement will revolve around people. And so you're looking at people and their motivations. So a big thing these days is flourishing, human flourishing. Um, what did people do to get to human flourishing? What did they do when they were not flourishing? How did they protest? How did they bring about their flourishing? How did they move closer to flourishing? And you'll want to know some of the basic human needs. This has maybe been improved upon. This is like the classic Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And you want to keep these in mind. So a lot of things that humans do, first of all, are for the base needs, the basic needs, right? But then what were they doing for community and connection? What were they doing to prosper or flourish, right? And you have like the Black Power movement. It's going to have elements of all of these. If you're theorizing the Black Power movement, it's going to be about, hey, community protection, not being abused. Ironically, this is maybe unironically, this is a continual theme in African American history to be protected against the protectors and servers, the police. Right? Um, Black Panthers in Oakland, we're going to provide these needs for our community: food, clothing, jobs, right? But then at the same time in the Black Power movement, there's self-actualization, there's esteem, racial pride, pride about your facial features, about the color of your skin, about your hair. So I would say that a lot of movements, a lot of people and groups that you're studying is a complex mix of all of these. But I would still zero in. All humans are going to be somewhere in here. And you want to just acknowledge your thesis may totally center on their efforts to meet these things, to accomplish these things. Okay, the dimensions of well-being. So these are the different areas of society. So what areas of society may you focus on? Remember that these are overlapping. Sometimes they're impossible to distinguish. Sometimes you cannot dichotomize like this or separate like this. But what are you focusing on in particular? What area are you focusing on? Right? And what's the overlap, dare I say, intersectionality, right, of these areas? And what are your people trying to get from these areas? So from all these areas, there are some basics. There are maybe, for lack of a better term, like some higher elements of these areas. What is trying to be accomplished? right? So obviously, like with the Harlem Renaissance, how much are we going to deal with physiological needs? How much are we going to deal with safety needs? It seems like when great art is produced, that the physiological and safety needs are met. I think the love and belonging would be met, right? So maybe studies in the Harlem Renaissance wouldn't deal with these bottom three. They would be more the top two. And then the Great Depression hits, and this Great Depression, it gets us back down here, right? And the Harlem Renaissance is pretty much over. Okay, so think about that. And then you have stasis theory. You have stasis theory, which wants to bring out what we're talking about here. Thesis statement can the stasis theory can identify where is the discussion, but it can also identify where do we disagree. This is a good schema to use, right? So we have some basic facts. Can we all agree on the facts? That's the first stasis, conjecture. Can we all agree on definitions of things? And some people, this could be historians, it could be others, they want to have a good definition of hate speech. You want to have a good definition of freedom of speech. I've seen books on, let's say, slavery, and so like before we talk about antebellum American slavery, we want to define what slavery is. And I've even seen books that have posited that quote unquote free black people in the upper South and the North were in fact enslaved themselves. So you want to get your definitions, cause effects. Okay. Why did something happen? What was the reason why something happened? It's probably a multitude of things, but then we can go into primary reason, secondary reasons, right? Contributing factors. What was the effect of this thing? Okay, so I would say that for any issue, for what you are studying about the past, you can use this to for the literature to find out what's missing for the literature, the research gap, but also how you can construct your thesis. Okay, value is something being valued more than others in the historiography, in the actual uh, part of the past. Okay, so you can look at that and you can add value to something, or you can say that this was valuable and the historiography is not valuing it enough, or you can say that this thing in history, right? So Black people valued equality in American society, equality in all areas. Many white people, nay, most white Americans in the 1960s did not value that for Black people. So there's an issue there, right? So you can do the value in the historiography, you can do the value in the actual past. Action. Okay. Now this is getting more to something that's current. So I would say that this may be a little bit beyond the historical realm, but it could still be relevant. Okay, so were the actions of this or that group, this or that person, was it sufficient? Were the actions sufficient? Did they bring about what that person wanted? Right, so this could be another sort of mooted historical area. Uh, was the civil rights movement really effective? And a lot of Black people back in the day, so let's say someone like the classic Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr. binary that people remark on, where people present King as wanting integration, even beyond desegregation, wanting integration, and X as wanting separation. So if the civil rights movement, to some degree, obtains desegregation and maybe racial integration, King says that's not a good thing. Excuse me, X says that's not a good thing. You don't want a racist white teacher teaching your child. You don't want to go to a diner where the white chefs will spit in your food. Yeah. So um, that is an action stasis. Okay, and it's a value. Finally, jurisdiction, right? What is the realm of of this question, right? And once again, this can be in the past, it can be in historiography. Okay, it can be in the past, it can be in the historiography. So those are two different areas. But this is about um, what area, how should this be addressed? Okay, how should it be addressed? Who should have addressed it? Okay, moving right along, your thesis may explain why or how people did something. This is a review. Your thesis may explain why or how people did something and the effect or impact it had, right? The effect or impact that it had. Your thesis may explain the effect of something on people and how they responded to it. Okay, we've already covered this. Your thesis may explain why and how people did something comparatively or extraordinarily. Your thesis may bring out uh, a little known aspect of a major event or development. Right? Your thesis may demonstrate how something came to be. So historians are big on change. Remember that things were like this at one point, and then because of the actions of people, it changed. Right? So you are accounting for that change. Yes? So something extraordinary or different happens, and you are accounting for that, right? You are explaining that. Okay, so consider explanations of you are tracking a change. There's a comparative element. It is something extraordinary, right? So you are accounting for something that is different from what usually happened, right? The difficulty of doing something, you're explaining how this was difficult to do. So something daunting like abolitionists in the antebellum period, civil rights movement activists, right? You are showing how what what I tell my students, one of the major themes of Black history is that when Black people saw something that was unjust, saw something that needed to be changed in American society, they changed it. They changed it, right? But this seems like it's intractable. So the slavery system is the warp and woof of America, right? You are going to overthrow and eradicate this system. How do you do it? It's daunting. It seems impossible. Same with the civil rights movement, Jim and Jane Crow. Daunting and impossible. How did they overthrow it? Right? This accomplishment, you're explaining how this was accomplished, the impact or effect. We discussed this, the significance, right? Why is this significant? Why is it important? Right? That's going to be an aspect of your thesis. And here we see our good sister, Zora Neale Hurston, right? And she was a major thesis creator, right? She was a major thesis creator, right? Go beyond just their eyes were watching God. She did some wonderful things in anthropology. Okay, so think about a comparative element. Why did people do this now and not earlier or later? Why did they do it and others didn't? What did people in similar situations do in the past? And what did people in similar situations do in the present in other places? Okay, so something could be extraordinary because it was done here and not there, or temporarily, it was done at this time, but not another time, right? So, probably as humans, we tend to think comparatively, right? So take advantage of that, right? Do that comparative thinking. All right. Please know that whatever thesis you do, whatever thesis you create, there's going to be an element of so what? You need to show this may be an uh, undue burden put on historians, but that's life, and that's what we signed up for. So not only do you have to have an explanation of the past, right? Make an argument about the past, but you then have to say, why does it matter? So what? So I'm saying that this, this happened in the past, or this happened because of this, or people did this, or whatever. Now you have to say, so why does this matter? What's the point of this? How does it affect the present? What's the relevance? Where does this fit? What should we do with this? That has to be an element of your thesis statement. It has to be an element of your thesis statement. And the part of your thesis statement that's going to do the most work is obviously your main argument. But then I would say inherent in that argument is its relationship to the discussion, its relationship to the present. All right. So major thesis aspect of your thesis is showing what it does to the discussion. So remember that this is all back to the discussion. Okay. So together as a group, we are trying to make history. We're trying to do history. Remember, it's different from the past, what happened in the past. We're trying to make sense of the past, and this is done in discussion. Where does your thesis statement stand in the discussion? Why is it important to the discussion, maybe in general today, to everybody today? And why should we care? Why should we care? This will be a major aspect of your thesis statement. So what? And you may think, like I used to think, why do we have to spoon feed the people everything? You have to do this because it's yours. It's your voice. It's your argument, right? You have to make the case for yourself because if you don't, what are other people just going to see the genius of your position? Are they going to see the genius of your argument? Why would you leave that to other people to see? Why don't you show them why what you're saying is important to the discussion and the argument? Okay, finally, our part five, and this is when everything comes together. In one paragraph, share your thesis statement. If you need more, you got it. But let's say one paragraph. So you may have a lead up to the thesis with some background, hey, you may give background on your historical topic, on the past. You may give some background with what historians and scholars have said about it, right? We'll discuss all of this. It's up to you. Then you're going to state your thesis, your main argument, and you're going to explain it and the components of it. You're going to explain what you're going to do. You're going to explain maybe how the argument operates, the the layers of the argument. You may explain your argument. You may explain some of the evidence that you're going to use for your argument. And then, as we just discussed, you're going to state why your thesis matters to scholars in the field, why it matters in the present, maybe why it matters to the nation or why it matters to humanity. This is your work. It should probably be able to be explained in one paragraph, especially like on the undergraduate semester level that we're talking about. Okay, so remember to always keep in mind our historian's ethics for this thesis creation. You are eminently curious. Your curiosity is going to lead you to the truth, right? Um, to an interpretation of the past, to making sense, making meaning of the past as you see it. You are going to be able to replicate it because you're going to be open and honest about the sources you used. So people may come to a different conclusion but they can always see the same thing that you've seen. They can see the same things that you have seen. So they can access your sources and look at your sources. Like I said, they may come to a different conclusion, but they can at least see how you got to where you got to because they can see all your sources, right? So remember that this historical process is based on the scientific method, right? Which you are openly demonstrating how you came to something, and people can come behind and they can replicate it. Remember that as a historian, you are, in a way, you don't judge because these are human beings kind of like acting and living and making mistakes just like we are, just like we do. But at the same time, you are going to have some type of judgment about what people did, what they accomplished, how they were living. Maybe there are some not so savory characters, right? Who was oppressing, right? Who was resisting that oppression? Who was stopping people from resisting the oppression? Right? There's all sorts of layers to this, but you are going to have to give a clear judgment because people are saying, well, you've been studying this for the longest. So we trust your judgment, or we at least want to hear what you have to say because you've been the closest to this, right? You are the new expert on this aspect of it. Empathy, you are putting yourself in the shoes of your historical actors. So you are looking at things from their perspective. Okay, so there is a form of empathy. You can at least understand where they're coming from. Not that you agree with it. You may think it's odious, but in order to explain it to a certain degree, you have to kind of put yourself in their shoes, right? Gratitude for the discussion, for those who have contributed to the discussion, for those who have enriched your understanding of it. For all the historians, for all the archivists, for all the librarians, for all the digitizers who have made your research possible and easier. Look at the wealth of stuff online and think someone somewhere put that online, they digitized it, they made it available, right? We are in very much community. We are very much cooperating with each other to make sense of the past, to make meaning, to make a contribution, and your allegiance is to the truth. So this kind of puts booster history, where you're just trying to big up something or a corporation or a group or a nation. Um, this hagiography where you're writing a history and turning somebody into a saint or whatever. This puts that all to the side and says, what is the truth? My allegiance is to the truth. My allegiance is to the truth. So think of all these things while you are drafting, creating your thesis. Like I said, this is peak work. This is a peak task. And as historians, this is really where we distinguish ourselves and really engage in the profession and carry out our work.